The air in the Galerie de l'Elight was thick with the scent of expensive sandalwood and even more expensive pretend. It was the grand reveal night, an event where the gatekeepers of the art world gathered to decide whose career would skyrocket and whose would wither. In the shadows, in the center of the North Gallery, surrounded by minimalist sculptures and muted charcoal sketches, hung a canvas that looked like a thunderstorm had collided with a neon factory. It was raw, aggressive, and unapologetically loud. "It's offensive." "Really?" hissed Julian Thorne, a critic whose reviews could bankrupt a studio with a single adjective. He adjusted his silk cravat, peering through his glasses at a particularly jagged stroke of crimson. "It lacks the basic understanding of negative space. It's the visual equivalent of a temper tantrum." Beside him, Beatrice Vane, a senior curator for the city's largest museum, let out a performative sigh. "It's worse than that, Julian. It's pedestrian. It's the kind of thing you'd find in a hobbyist's garage, or perhaps a primary school classroom. To hang this next to a Masterson original, it's a slap in the face to every real artist in this room." A few feet away, leaning against a marble pillar, stood a man in a faded, oversized hoodie and paint-stained jeans. This was Ozzy. He looked like he'd wandered in looking for a restroom, but his eyes were fixed intently on the canvas. In his hand was a plastic cup of cheap water, a stark contrast to the crystal flutes of vintage Bollinger being waved around by the elite. "Excuse me," Ozzy said softly, his voice cutting through Julian's monologue. "You don't think the raw energy? You know, the way the colors bleed. Tells a story about survival." Julian turned, his lip curling as he took in Ozzy's disheveled appearance. "Survival. My dear boy, the only thing struggling for survival here is the viewer's optic nerve. This isn't art. It's a mess. But I suppose to the unrefined eye, bright and messy passes for deep." Beatrice giggled, a sharp, cold sound. "Don't bother, Julian. Some people are simply born to be spectators, not connoisseurs." She turned her back on Ozzy, signaling the manager with a sharp snap of her fingers. "Marcus, come here at once. We need to discuss why this garbage is taking up wall space at a professional opening." The gallery manager, Marcus, approached with a gait that suggested he was walking on eggshells. His forehead was slick with a fine sheen of sweat, his eyes darting nervously between the high-profile critics and the man in the paint-stained hoodie. He looked like a man caught between two firing squads. "Ah, Mr. Thorne, Miss Vane," Marcus stammered, smoothing his tailored blazer. "Is there a concern with the curation?" Julian Thorne gestured vaguely toward the neon street canvas with a hand that trembled from sheer indignation. "A concern? Marcus, this isn't a concern. It's an institutional crisis. We've spent decades building the Galerie de l'Elight into a sanctuary for the sublime. And yet, here we are, standing in front of a piece that looks like it was painted by someone who's never even heard of the Renaissance." Beatrice Vane leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that she clearly intended for the whole room to hear. "It's a mockery. Marcus, I was prepared to recommend 3 of your emerging artists for the summer biennial, but if this is the direction the gallery is taking, praising the mediocre, the uneducated, the ugly, then I'm afraid my museum can no longer associate with this establishment." The room went silent. A summer biennial recommendation was the equivalent of a golden ticket in the art world. If Beatrice pulled her support, the gallery's market value would plummet by millions overnight. Ozzy, still leaning against his marble pillar, took a slow sip of his water. "You're talking about the brushwork," he said, his voice calm, almost meditative. "But what about the intent? The way the red cuts through the blue, it's not about space, it's about a heartbeat. It's about being pushed to the edge and refusing to disappear." Julian let out a sharp, barking laugh. He turned to Ozzy, his eyes narrowing. "Intent. My dear boy, intent is the refuge of the incompetent. Anyone can claim intent when they lack the technical skill to draw a straight line. You seem to have a lot of opinions for someone who looks like they slept in a dumpster. Tell me, do you even know the difference between an oil-based primer and a gesso?" "I know that the gesso doesn't matter if the soul is missing," Ozzy replied simply. The insult, for that is how Julian took it, was the final straw. The critic turned back to Marcus, his face flushing a deep, angry purple. "Marcus, remove this man, and remove this eyesore now, or I will ensure my column in tomorrow's Art Herald describes this gallery as a dumping ground for amateur hour charlatans." Marcus looked at Ozzy. For a split second, a look of pure terror flashed across the manager's face. He didn't move to grab Ozzy's arm. Instead, he took a half step back, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Thorne," Marcus whispered. "Can't?" Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Are you out of your mind? Do you realize who we are?" "I do," Marcus said, finally finding his voice, though it was barely audible. "But I think you've forgotten where you are. This isn't just a room you rent for an evening. This is a business, and the business has changed hands." Julian sneered. "I don't care if the landlord changed. The art remains the same, and this art is trash." "Actually," Ozzy interrupted, pushing off the pillar and stepping into the center of the circle, "the art belongs to the gallery, and as of 9 a.m. this morning, the gallery belongs to me." The silence that followed Ozzy's statement wasn't just quiet. It was vacuums. Julian Thorne's mouth hung open, a half-formed insult dying on his tongue. Beatrice Vane's hand, still clutching her champagne flute, began to tremble so violently that the golden liquid threatened to spill onto her vintage silk dress. Julian finally sputtered, his voice cracking. You bought the gallery to like. Don't be absurd. This building alone is worth 20 million. The collection is priceless. You look like you've been painting fences for minimum wage. Ozzy didn't flinch. He reached into the front pocket of his oversized hoodie and pulled out a sleek, obsidian black card, the kind issued only to those whose net worth requires a dedicated team of bankers. He tossed it onto a nearby pedestal, right next to a $50,000 sculpture. I don't paint fences, Julian, Ozzy said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the soft, inquisitive tone from before. I paint what I feel, and I buy what I want to protect. I grew up in a neighborhood where the only art we had was graffiti on the side of a bus. Those artists had more soul in a spray can than you've had in 30 years of writing columns. Marcus, the manager stepped forward, his posture suddenly rigid and professional now that the secret was out. It's true, the acquisition was finalized this morning. Mr. Oswald Thorne, no relation, I assume. Julian is the sole proprietor of this gallery and its sister locations in London and Singapore. The blood drained from Julian's face. He looked at the painting again, the one he had just called visual garbage and a pedestrian mess. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had just insulted the most powerful man in the room, the man who now held the keys to his professional playground. Mr. Thorne, Ozzy. Please, Beatrice said, her voice suddenly dripping with a syrupy, desperate sweetness. You must understand the nature of a critique. We were merely testing the waters. We look for passion, and your work, it's overflowing with it. The raw energy we discussed, it's revolutionary. I can see it now. With the right framing, this could be the centerpiece of our autumn gala. Ozzy looked at her, his expression unreadable. 10 minutes ago, you said it was a slap in the face to every real artist. You said I was born to be a spectator. I was mistaken, she chirped, her eyes darting toward the exit. Art is a journey, and I've just reached a new destination. No, Ozzy said, stepping toward the painting and tracing the air in front of the crimson streak the critics had hated most. You didn't reach a destination. You just saw a price tag. That's the problem with people like you. You don't see the art. You see the social capital. You don't hear the heartbeat. You hear the auctioneer's gavel. He turned to Marcus. Marcus, I want the sold sign placed on this piece immediately. Of course, sir, Marcus replied. To whom shall I list the buyer? Me, Ozzy said. I'm buying my own work for $2 million. The proceeds will go toward funding art programs in the public schools you two probably think are beneath your notice. Then, he turned back to the critics. The crowd had gathered around, phones out, recording the entire exchange. The gatekeepers were being dismantled in real time, and the video was already beginning its ascent into viral history. Julian, Beatrice, Ozzy said calmly, since you find my amateur hour gallery so offensive to your refined sensibilities, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm revoking your memberships to this gallery and to every institution I fund, which, as of this morning, includes the museum you work for. Beatrice's glass finally slipped, shattering on the marble floor. I think it's time for you to leave, Ozzy concluded, turning his back on them to look at his painting once more. The cleaning crew is coming in tonight to sweep up the trash. I'd hate for you to get caught in the broom. As the security guards escorted the stunned, silent critics toward the heavy oak doors, the rest of the room erupted into hushed, frantic whispers. Ozzy stayed exactly where he was, a man in a hoodie standing before a chaotic masterpiece. Finally, at peace in a room he didn't just belong in, he owned it. The heavy oak doors of the gallery de l'Elite didn't just close behind Julian and Beatrice. They seemed to seal an era. Outside, the rain began to slick the pavement of the Upper East Side, mirroring the cold realization dawning on the two critics huddled under a single, expensive umbrella. They were no longer the architects of taste. They were ghosts in a world that had moved on in the span of a single conversation. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted from sterile tension to a buzzing, electric curiosity. The elite guests, who had spent the first half of the evening mimicking Julian's scoffs, were now frantically deleting their social media posts and replacing them with captions like, witnessing a revolution in real time, and the raw genius of Ozzy. Ozzy didn't care. He walked over to the catering table, grabbed a napkin, and wiped a smudge of charcoal from his thumb. Marcus, Ozzy said, his voice regaining that quiet, grounded quality. Empty the room. Give them 10 minutes to finish their bottle. Then tell them the gallery is closed for a private event. But sir, Marcus whispered, glancing at the crowd of billionaire donors and influencers, these are the most influential people in the city. Some have flown in from Paris just for this opening. Ozzy looked at the crowd, people who had spent the night ignoring him until they found out he held the deed to the floor they stood on. The only people I want to talk to tonight haven't arrived yet. Open the back service entrance. There's a bus pulling up in 5 minutes. As the confused socialites were ushered out the front, a different group began to trickle in through the service door. They were teenagers, mostly kids from the Bronx and Brooklyn, wearing hoodies identical to Ozzy's, carrying sketchbooks with frayed edges and backpacks, smelling of spray paint and turpentine. Among them was a young girl named Maya, no older than 16, who stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the neon red canvas. She didn't look for a signature. She didn't check the price tag. She just walked up to it and breathed. It looks like how it feels when the subway pulls out and you're the only one left on the platform. Ozzy walked up beside her. Exactly, he said. Except the red is the taillights. You're not stuck. You're just watching the old path leave so you can find a new one. Maya looked at him, then at the sold sign Marcus was currently sticking to the frame. You're the one who bought the community center's supplies last month, aren't you? The anonymous donor. Ozzy shrugged, a small, genuine smile tugging at his lips. I just hate seeing good talent go to waste because they can't afford a decent set of oils. I used to steal my acrylics from a hardware store. Maya, it's a lot harder to paint a masterpiece when you're looking over your shoulder for the cops. For the next 3 hours, the Galerie de la Light transformed. The untouchable marble floors became a classroom. Ozzy sat on the floor with the kids, passing around $100 art books like they were comic strips, discussing color theory not as a set of rules, but as a weapon. He showed them that the very critics who had tried to bury him were the same people who would try to tell them their stories didn't matter. As the night wound down, Marcus approached Ozzy with a tablet. Sir, the video of the reveal has reached 40 million views. Julian Thorne has issued a formal apology on his website, and Beatrice Vane has reportedly resigned from the museum board. Ozzy didn't even look at the screen. He was watching Maya sketch a quick, defiant portrait of the gallery's security guard in the back of her notebook. Do you want to respond to the apology, Mr. Thorne? Marcus asked. No, Ozzy said, standing up and stretching his back. Julian lives in a world where words are used to build fences. I'm done with fences. Tomorrow, I want you to take down all the minimalist sublime pieces in the East Wing. We're turning it into a permanent, rotating exhibit for local youth programs. No entry fee, no dress code. And the critics? Marcus asked. Ozzy looked at his own painting. The mess, the eyesore, the $2 million heartbeat. Tell them the gallery is under new management. And the new manager doesn't speak pretentious, he only speaks truth. As the last of the students filed out, Ozzy grabbed a spray can he'd tucked behind the pedestal. With one swift, graceful motion, he added a single, neon green streak to the bottom corner of his $2 million masterpiece. It was a signature, a defiance, and a promise. The elite were gone. The art had finally come home. The morning after the grand reveal, the art world woke up to a digital earthquake. The video of Julian Thorne's humiliation hadn't just gone viral. It had become a manifesto. By 9 a.m., the hashtag OZZY'S gallery was trending globally, fueled by a generation of artists who had spent years being told their work wasn't academic enough for the white-walled sanctuaries of the elite. Outside the Galerie de the scene was unrecognizable. The velvet ropes had been coiled up and tossed into a corner. In their place stood a line of people that stretched 3 blocks down the rain-slicked sidewalk. There were no black tie suits or silk cravats. Instead, there were art students with charcoal-stained fingers, grandmothers from the outer boroughs, and tourists who had seen the hoodie billionaire on their morning news feed. Inside, Marcus was frantically trying to coordinate a security team that was used to guarding quiet, empty rooms. Sir, he said, catching Ozzy near the loading dock. The board of directors from the National Museum is on line 1. They're offering to buy the Neon Storm for $5 million. They want to make it the centerpiece of their new Modern Voices wing. Ozzy was busy helping a delivery crew unload crates of high-grade canvases and industrial-sized tubs of acrylic paint. He didn't even look up. Tell them it's not for sale. I already bought it, remember? And tell them if they want Modern Voices, they should stop charging $30 for admission so the people actually making those voices can afford to walk through the front door. And the critics? Marcus asked, his voice shaking slightly. Julian Thorne has issued a third apology. He's offering to write a full-length biography on your journey from the streets to the boardroom. Ozzy stopped. A heavy crate of cobalt blue pigment balanced on his hip. He looked at Marcus with a tired, knowing smile. Julian doesn't want to write my story, Marcus. He wants to own the rights to it so he can feel relevant again. Tell him I'm too busy living the story to have someone else misinterpret it. As the gallery doors officially opened for the first day under the new regime, the silence was replaced by a low, vibrant hum. People weren't whispering. They were talking. They were pointing at the jagged red strokes and arguing not about negative space, but about how the painting made them feel. In the center of the main hall, where the eyesore still hung, Ozzy had placed a simple wooden table with a stack of index cards and a box of pens. A sign above it read, "Your turn. What do you see?" By noon, the wall surrounding the $2 million painting was covered in hundreds of cards. It looks like the night my father left it. Looks like the first time I fell in love in the rain. It looks like the city. Finally screaming back, Ozzy stood in the back, leaning against the same marble pillar where he had been mocked just 24 hours earlier. He watched as Maya, the girl from the night before, led a group of her friends toward a blank wall in the East Wing. "Mr. Ozzy," she called out, gesturing to the empty space. "You said this was for us, right?" Ozzy nodded. "The wall is primed. The paint is in the crates. You've got 6 hours before the evening crowd gets here. Show them something they've never seen before." As the kids began to crack open the paint tubs, the smell of fresh pigment filled the air, drowning out the lingering scent of expensive sandalwood. This wasn't just a gallery anymore. It was a heartbeat. Late that evening, after the last visitor had left, Ozzy sat alone in the center of the room. The neon storm hung before him, now surrounded by the collective voices of 1,000 strangers on index cards. He pulled a small, battered notebook from his hoodie pocket, the one he'd carried since he was a kid sleeping on a park bench. He turned to a fresh page and wrote a single sentence. The gatekeepers didn't lose the keys. I just took the hinges off the door. He closed the book, stood up, and clicked off the spotlights. For the first time in the history of the Galleria de Laylight, the room wasn't dark. The neon green streak he had added to the corner of his painting glowed in the shadows, a steady, unyielding light that refused to be dimmed by anyone's opinion. The revolution wasn't just televised. It was painted in red and gold, and it was only just beginning. 6 months later, the Galleria de Laylight was gone. In its place stood the Pulse, a glass-fronted sanctuary where the distinction between street art and high art had been systematically dismantled. The heavy oak doors had been replaced by pivoting glass walls that stayed open 18 hours a day. Ozzy sat on the roof of the building, his legs dangling over the ledge, looking down at the vibrant courtyard below. A massive Marula collaboration between Maya and 3 other local teenagers now covered the entire north face of the neighboring skyscraper. It was a riot of color, a visual scream that could be seen from the Brooklyn Bridge. Beside him sat a man who looked remarkably like Julian Thorne, though the silk cravat had been replaced by a simple linen shirt, and the haughty sneer had been softened by a look of genuine exhaustion. It was Julian's younger brother, Simon, who had spent the last decade being the black sheep of the family for wanting to teach art in prisons. My brother is officially done, you know, Simon said, staring out at the skyline. The Art Herald folded last week. No one wanted to read the opinions of a man who couldn't see a masterpiece when it was staring him in the face. He's living in a cottage in Vermont now, shouting at the clouds. Ozzy chuckled, a low, dry sound. I didn't want to destroy him, Simon. I just wanted him to stop being a ghost. He was haunted by rules that didn't exist. You did more than that, Ozzy, Simon replied, gesturing to the courtyard below. You turned a tomb into a playground? Downstairs? The gallery was hosting its first blind auction. It was an idea Ozzy had dreamt up during a sleepless night. 50 paintings hung on the walls, all framed identically. No signatures were visible. No artist bios were provided. Potential buyers had to bid based on how the work made them feel, not whose name was in the bottom corner. Among the pieces was a $10 million Masterson and a $50 sketch by a homeless veteran Ozzy had met in the subway. At the end of the night, the veteran's sketch sold for more than the Masterson. The buyer was a tech mogul who admitted, with tears in his eyes, that the sketch reminded him of the mother he'd lost. That was the Ozzy effect. It was the democratization of emotion. Ozzy stood up, brushing the dust from his jeans. I'm leaving, Simon. The foundation is set, and Marcus knows how to run the business side of things. You're in charge of the curriculum now. Simon looked up, startled. Leaving? Where are you going? You're the face of the movement. You're the hoodie billionaire. Ozzy pulled a small, worn backpack onto his shoulders. It was the same one he'd had the night of the reveal, now even more battered and stained with fresh streaks of neon green. I'm going to Detroit, Ozzy said, then Chicago, then Oakland. There are too many cities where the elites still have the doors locked tight. I've got enough money to buy a few more galleries, and I've got enough paint to make sure everyone hears the heartbeat. As he turned to head toward the roof access door, he paused and looked back at the neon storm through the skylight. It looked different from up here, less like a tantrum and more like a map. And Simon, Ozzy called out, tell Maya she's in charge of the East Wing mural next month. Tell her not to use any rulers. The world has enough straight lines. Ozzy disappeared into the stairwell, leaving the lights of the city to dance across the glass. He didn't want a statue, and he didn't want a biography. He just wanted to be the man who took the hinges off the door and left it open for the rest of us to walk through. The revolution wasn't finished. It was just moving to a different neighborhood,